What's your damn eye moment? Not as cool as some of the others here, but I was running through a building, down a ramp with polished cement floors, and I somehow ended up falling down on one knee. With my high momentum I managed to slide all the way down the ramp, it was very long, and then kick myself back up into running again. It all happened completely smoothly, and it felt like an action scene. When I was in elementary school, we'd sit in the cafeteria and wait for the bus number to be called. On one particular day, I was ready to go home. I grabbed my bag and ran for that door. Unbeknownst to me, right in my path, after I turned the corner, about halfway down the ramp to the bus lane, was a wet floor sign and a bucket of some kind. I was running too fast to stop myself, and there were kids on either side of me, so I did the only logical thing. I jumped it like it was a hurdle. Cleared it without knocking over the sign, and landed about 4 or 5 feet down the ramp with a cool, for a 7-year-old, 3-point touch. This was literally the coolest thing I've done in 12 years of school. Except maybe the time when I was in middle school where I raced the wind to snag my kite after the line got torn from my hands. I got that bloody kite back too. I went on a snorkeling trip off the coast of Kauai. There was a newlywed couple there that I could tell weren't good in the water. We're out in the water and they're off by themselves, and I can see that the wife is crying and the husband has a panicked look on his face. Turns out they didn't realize that skin contracts in water, and he lost his wedding ring off his finger. I scan around for a while and find it 30 feet down or so. I run down and get it and give it back to them. They were thrilled. Nothing like that King Triton feeling. I used to do this kind of thing all the time as a dive master and a lifeguard, probably recovering around 50 things for customers over the years. I once free dove 95 feet for a GoPro, made it look real easy but definitely thought I was going to black out. Nice. Did you have something to plug your ears? I can't dive more than 7 feet or so without a horrible pain in my ears. Just did the good old Valsalve maneuver, when you plug your nose and blow gently, to equalize the pressure inside your ears. I saved my husband's life using the Heimlich maneuver, on the first try, never having done it before. This is the thing about the Heimlich that always sorta trips me out. Everyone more or less has been told at some point in their life how to do the Heimlich, but there's no real training for it to see if what you've been told translates into an effective maneuver. The only way to know is in the moment, that moment where someone is choking and they are going to die, unless you manage to apply all of that instruction correctly on the first time. The Heimlich maneuver is like one of the all-time most insane high-stakes situations you can be in. Big ups to you for getting it right the first try. My only experience with the Heimlich was when I was about 12 eating dinner on my deck in the backyard and my 10-year-old sister came behind me and just yelled Heimlich and did the maneuver on me. I immediately threw up whatever I just swallowed and all my sister did was laugh. Edit. Thank you for the hug award lol. And I'm fine, I'm going to be 24 in September. It's something we laugh about to this day. Thanks everyone. Okay, this made me laugh out loud. Sorry that it's at your expense, but imagining this with my own siblings doing it to me makes it hilarious to me. I didn't think how cool/good it was at the moment, but when I was like 5 or 6 a woman covered in blood crawled to my childhood house door and started banging on it. I woke up from the noise and went to open it. When I opened it, I just saw her in cuts, scratches, bruises, etc. Apparently her boyfriend was trying to actually kill her, and she managed to escape. She asked to be let in for safety, and I let her in, and went to go wake up my mom. When she came out she was shocked to see her, and went to clean her wounds a bit and later called the police and ambulance. I didn't fix her wounds or anything, but I'd like to think that I saved her life that day. Lol. You were 6. I didn't fix her wounds or anything. It's still super badass, but that would have just been miraculous. Lol. Something I'm quite upset about this situation is that I never learned her name, though I'm sure I could, but I'm not too upset, but it's more of a WW. I wish I knew her name, so I could talk to her again. I'm sure she probably feels the same about you. If I were in her shoes, I would never forget about a little kid whose first reaction was compassion. I have a few moments that make me feel good about myself, but I'm going to talk about this because it happened when I was like 22, and it was one of my first time an adult, and I'm not half bad at it moments. Was driving back really late after hanging with some friends, like 2 in the morning. It's raining really hard and the roads are dangerously slick. Some guy, well he less turns than slides onto the road ahead of me, going up this massive hill with a steep grade, and he isn't controlling his car well. I see him fishtail a couple times, but barely regain control, so I back way off and slow down. Not sure if he was drunk or just the rain, but I think to myself he's gonna lose it, and sure enough, when I round the next corner, there he is in the deep ditch. He was gunning the wheels and spewing mud and grass everywhere, but obviously couldn't get out like that, and I'm sure his adrenaline was wrecking any chance at slow rational thought, because he just went over a tiny cliff. I pulled over, got out in the rain waving my arms to get him to stop, told him what to do, go as slow as possible, angle the wheels the right way, but I noticed his hand shaking and ended up asking him to get out. I managed to get his car out of the ditch, but when I went to give him back his keys I see his whole body is visibly shaking from the shock, so I offered to give him a hug. We hugged for what felt like 10 minutes, it was probably just a minute, and he started crying, I assume just that wave of relief after an adrenaline rush. He wasn't drunk, or it wasn't apparent, but he's clearly not okay to drive, so when I thought he'd let most of it out I asked where he lived, which was just up the road a little ways. I checked that his car was okay to drive for a bit, that the radiator wasn't busted, etc. Told him to get in, and drove him to his place, walked him inside, and told him to not drive until the next day and to get his undercarriage checked. Walked back to my car in the rain and went home. Essentially watched a late 90s Ford Explorer, I thought, overcorrect and roll off the interstate. The vehicle had rolled and came to a stop about 100 feet away and down a hill near the underpass. I was in a work truck with 2 of my co-workers, followed by another work truck with 4 workers. We sprang to action like some sort of emergency team. Numerous vehicles were pulling over, and 3 of my co-workers stayed behind to call 911 and prevent people from getting too close. The wrecked vehicle was 2 adults, a toddler, and an infant. The infant was completely fine and still in a carrier, so one co-worker unclipped it and took it closer to the road to be safe and await medical. The woman was thrown from the vehicle. One of my co-workers was keeping her still and watching for breathing as she was in and out of consciousness. My task with my other co-worker was to attend to the man and the toddler still in the vehicle. The man was pinned by his door and the steering wheel and was pouring blood and screaming, "My baby, my baby." I sent the co-worker to help him after we disconnected the car battery. I pulled the toddler out of the vehicle. The little boy was completely unconscious, bleeding from his mouth, nose, and maybe eyes, and not breathing. I made sure the mouth was clear and started compressions for 5-ish minutes until help arrived. Everyone lived. I still have nightmares, but damn, I'm a note, a little blood is a lot of blood, and an actual lot of blood is terrifying. Added the news link for accuracy. Edit. Thanks for all of your kind words, I truly appreciate it. Also, buy a first aid kit for your car, you just never know. Educate yourself however you can, you just never know. I'm not special, I'm just a person who cares who happened to have the knowledge to help. I'm gobsmacked. Yeah, you helped out at the vehicle, particularly the CPR on the infant, but you all made sure that someone was calling 911. Amazing how often it doesn't happen. Left people to control onlookers, and you knew to disconnect the battery. Edit. After a crash, it is recommended to disconnect the negative terminal from the battery. This is to remove the risk of an electrical spark from igniting fuel that might be leaking. Firefighters will have insulated cutters. I think in many cases you can force the cable off if you have no tools. My father was denied his military pension back in the '70s when he became old enough to collect it. The government said he'd missed some reserve time and therefore wasn't entitled to retirement. Dad died some 20 years later, never having received a dime of his pension or any medical benefits. Fast forward to about 20 years ago. I started combing through Dad's old naval records and determined that it literally came down to his missing a single 4-hour drill in 1962. I couldn't believe it. He was a WWII combat pilot and had months of extra service in the .40s, but due to the way these things were accounted for back then, those months were rounded down to the next lower whole year. So, months of service just tossed away, but a missing 4-hour drill record killed his pension. Seemed fair. Anyway, I gathered records and penned a very detailed and pointed letter to the US Navy and asked them to reconsider. This thing took me weeks to prepare. To my surprise, they did. And, even more to my surprise, they agreed with me that Dad was given the rawest of deals, especially considering his service in the Pacific during the war. Some weeks later I got a retirement certificate signed by the president and a big fat check from the US Treasury for about 20 years worth of missed retirement checks. Not a physical thing, but that made me feel like a badass for writing such an indignity. It was too late for Dad, but still satisfying. This was kinda weird, but couple years ago wife and I were driving home in the pouring rain from my mom's house. She lives in Stafford Valley and the back roads are super curvy, sometimes makes me sick driving it. Anyways, we roll up to a car spun up, and the front is tore up. We pull up as we are the only ones there, and see another car off to the ditch and side smashed into a tree. It's a pretty deep ditch / side of the road and the guy in the road is freaking out. I get out and instantly get soaked. And talk to the guy. He's a young dude and says he didn't see the car and hit them dead on, and they went down the side into the trees. I tell him to wait in my car and get my wife to call 911. I look at the car and see the front is smashed and smoking coming out from under the hood. I gulp and say to myself, I'm about to see a headless person or someone with their guts hanging out. I slide down the side and I look and see older people in the car. Luckily they seem alive and alert, but they can't get out as the doors are stuck due to how the car is sitting on the ground and the wheels are destroyed. I have to literally rip the driver door back with the guy inside pushing, so I can get him out. He's kinda cut up and dazed. I get him out, and he's able to walk. His wife on the side, her leg is messed up. I have to rip the door open myself as she's out of it. I put all my weight and bend the door back enough to get to her. Her ankle is broken, so I'll lift and carry her up the embankment and to the road. Luckily the ambulance and police arrive, and I'm able to get her to the back. All things considering, it came out better than one would assumed. Impress myself and wife as I just acted and didn't think, just ran on instincts. It wasn't really like the movies or anything. No one knew my name or asked for it. Cop didn't give a or cared. Ambulance drove off with the couple to the hospital, and the young guy that caused the wreck had his mom pick up as the cop wrote him a ticket, got him his car and left. At that point I'm just soaking wet with cars trying to get around us. Anyways, still felt good. Back in the day, I trained a few years in judo. A few regional tournaments convinced me that I'm a fairly mediocre martial artist. 10 years later a big athletic guy outweighed me by probably 80 pounds. Took a swing at me outside of a bar, and I threw him with a massive shoulder throw with basically zero effort or thought. I started to lock his elbow on the ground, but realized he was mostly knocked out, so I just stood up. I left as quickly as I could, but I saw like a dozen guys with open mouths saying things like, "Did you see that?" I pulled over to throw up on the way home. Edit. A few years later, I related this story to a friend who works in military special operations, including the embarrassing part where I barfed. He said something that I've never forgotten: "That's not a big deal, man. A lot of guys get sick before every big mission. Bad. The guys who do things. Sometimes, you are terrified, and you push through it to do things anyway. I'm in no way, shape, or form anything resembling a, but I like my friend's definition of courage. Who cares if you are the cool guy in the movies? who walks away from explosions. What matters is if you pulled the girl out of the car before it blew up. Doing what is necessary, even if you are scared, especially when done for the benefit of other people, is the real definition of obese most of my life. Worked really hard, lost 100 lbs. Took up running, and decided to run a marathon. I've never felt more like a man when I crossed that finish line. The training and the race itself were the hardest things I've done in my life, and there were many times throughout where I really wasn't sure I was going to make it. Hell yeah, great work. You're the kind of person I'm shooting to be, though, realistically, I'm not sure I'm going for a marathon. Just trying to live longer. I'm down 30 pounds already, and have another 90 or so, before I hit my end goal. I'm just excited to get onto the south side of 300 in more than a decade. Any sagely tips for us chunkers on how to keep shedding that weight? Congrats on the 30 pounds. That's a huge achievement. This might sound like a no-brainer, but one of the most important things that I learned is that motivation is fleeting, and you can't rely on that. There will be times, lots of them, where you have to force yourself to do things you really don't want to do. Don't feel like working out today? Too bad, go do it. Don't want to eat the salad you brought for lunch? Too bad, eat it. Obviously it's okay to take days off here and there, but if I took off every day I wanted to, I wouldn't have gotten where I needed to go. Also, celebrate every little victory. I got lost alone in Yellowstone after sunset. But I'd come prepared with a headlamp, kept my cool, and found my way back to my car alive. My detour added several miles to the route, and it was, and still is the most I've hiked in a single day, probably just under 14 miles. I could barely move when I got back to my car. I had to just sit for about 20 minutes before I was able to drive. But I got the most amazing view of the Milky Way of my entire life along the way. Totally worth it for that alone. Any mishap you survive becomes an adventure. My dog and I have had too many adventures. Thankfully we are old and survived them all, and we've learned that we've had enough adventures and stick to the local dog parks instead of wandering off into uncharted mountain terrain or briskly flowing river water. I was stupid, and I put his life at risk. The wild adventures are behind us, and we enjoy laying on the couch together now. He seemed to enjoy it, but I really should have known better most of the time. Now I know better. We've saved each other's lives too many times due to my impulsive stupidity. Possibly saving a life. I saw a motorcycle crash in a parking lot late at night. No one but me went to check on the guy, everyone else was just standing around looking. Dude had a compound fracture on his leg and blood was pouring through his jeans onto the ground. I used my belt to tourniquet the leg. The ambulance didn't arrive for another 2 minutes, so I might have saved him from bleeding out. Edit. Thanks for the award, stranger. Mad props. Wound up getting my arm sliced open really bad one night. If my coworker didn't tourniquet said I would died. If it was a little more to the left I would died regardless. This all stemmed from a moment that people would have considered, but alas. Also good on you all around. I saw a guy get hit on a motorcycle and he didn't make it. Given he went under the SUV and the bike went over, it was pretty horrible. I didn't do anything to help because no one there thought there was anything they could do to help at that point. The lady didn't stop driving the SUV for at least 10 seconds. It was horrible. A lot of people really wouldn't have known what to look for or what to do in that situation. I credit Boy Scouts for teaching me. My mom being a nurse and brother being an EMT might have helped as well. Important note for anyone that might remember this in a future emergency. I didn't move him. I'm not a professional and couldn't tell if he may have had a spinal injury, so I left him on the ground just how I found him. All I did was stop the bleeding long enough for professionals to arrive. I share mine with my dog. Did the adrenaline pumping car lift thing. My idiot neighbor was trying to change his own oil and didn't have the jack in the proper place. Whatever metal it was on bent and the car lowered onto him. him, which had his body positioned perfectly so the front tire would crush his dump. My dog was out back and started going insane barking, so I bolted outside, wondering what could be wrong. He only barks when something's wrong, like my kid left the yard or something. I see my neighbor's legs sticking out from his freaking tire, race inside screaming for my brother, then bolt back out and try to lift the car. My brother comes out, and as I somehow manage to lift the car just enough, he pulls the neighbor out. I was expecting him to be dead, but he stood up, coughed a few times, and said thanks. We called EMS to get him checked, and they took him to the hospital. He had some internal injuries, but survived and recovered fully. What I remember most is flopping to my driveway, thinking, that guy is an idiot. It was my brother that said I'm a and as the real hero. Yes, doggo got all the pats and scratches and treats. Life pro tip, always use jack stands and not a jack if you're going to be under a car. And don't cheap out on them. They are there to save your life. And know where the jacks can and can't go. I almost crushed myself my first time using a jack and jack stands. Do research, people. Always use at least 2 jack stands and leave my jack under holding some weight too. My biggest fear is having my car fall on me, lol. At a concert in between sets, saw this lady go down. I had just found a seat along the barrier between pit and general seating. I went up to the girl and her boyfriend and told them I had a seat in the wall if she needed to sit down a minute. She was pretty out of it, but the boyfriend said that'd be a good idea. We walked her over and flagged down one of the vendors to get her some water since she was really dehydrated. Right about now the headliner, Rob Zombie, came out on stage and then a huge mosh pit started right in front of us. Myself, the boyfriend, and another guy formed a protective wall around her, myself at the very front cause I'm the biggest. Most of the people were respectful and following mosh etiquette, but there was this one drunk dude who I guess saw what we were doing and decided it'd be fun to try and knock me down onto her. He came at me a little harder than everyone else. I just pushed him back in, then he came at me a little harder and I started to get a little angry. The third time he was almost rushing me, I gave him a decent shove and told him come at me like that one more time, mother. He did. I saw him coming, and this time I stepped forward into him and shoved my palms into his chest. He stumbled backwards clear across the other side of the pit and looked terrified. I shouted, try again, and I'll knock you out. He didn't come in our direction again after that. Felt pretty cool protecting that girl and checking that out. I've had big guys like you protect me when I've gotten unexpectedly caught in mosh pits a few times in my younger days. I like metal and hardcore, but am a small person and try to stay out of the pit, but sometimes they just happen. You and people like you are awesome, and I'm sure the girl and her boyfriend very much appreciated you. That's awesome. I just don't want to see anyone get hurt. I mean, you're gonna get some bumps and bruises of course, but I have no tolerance for bullies. I've always been mindful about what's going on around me at shows, but especially after that incident I keep a real close eye on things in the pit. This is the end of the video. Thank you guys for staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed watching this, you might as well watch these too.